For the past 8 years, my cell phone has been my constant companion. Scary as these studies are, I need to get the real facts. But I don't believe everything the internet says. Time to look for more. I'm here to meet Professor Girish Kumar, who's actually invented a radiation meter that can tell me how my innocent little instrument can actually be a risk or even a hazard to my health. Hi, sir.
I'm Girish Kumar.
Yeah, I'm Urmi and this is my phone. Let's get started.
Sure, yeah. Come to the lab. What we really have here.
The professor tells me the problem lies with how cell phones work. +5?
So you're dialing me, right? So you can see that the levels have gone up very high.
You've seen EMR flashed all over your cell phone user manual. It is basically a form of radio frequency. This radio frequency is emitted from the antenna of the phone, which is placed near the ear. If you're talking for more than 20 minutes on your cell phone, the EMR raises the earlobe and brain temperature by up to 2 degrees.
It is also penetrating the brain, skull, and it is heating the brain tissues inside there. Prolonged use of this one can actually lead to, say, brain tumor, it could be cancer, and in fact, a lot of people are reporting, depending upon where is the antenna. So suppose if antenna is here, instead of having a brain cancer, you may be having a throat cancer also.
The $200 billion a year cell phone industry maintains the scientific evidence doesn't support any such fears. But it turns out Richard Branson is not alone in his belief that cellular phones can no longer be presumed to be safe.
I'm on this thing every day.
In fact, even the man who 6 years ago was brought in by the industry to quell such fears, Dr. George Carlo, is now prepared to publicly say that has been the case all along.
You cannot guarantee that cell phones are safe. That's absolutely true, but that has always been true.
When cell phones first came out, it was widely assumed there couldn't be a risk because the power or radiation they produce was so low. But now that assumption is very much being called into question by several new scientific studies, which, while still preliminary, are regarded by some scientists as quite troubling. The cell phone transmits a microwave signal from the antenna to a base station or tower, often miles away. The farther away from the tower, or if the phone is inside a building or a car, the more power this phone is told by the tower to send out to make or keep the connection. Depending on how close the cell phone antenna is, as much as 60% of the microwave radiation is absorbed by and actually penetrates the area around the head, some reaching 1 inch to 1.5 inches into the brain.
And if I hold it to my head like this, there is no way that I can avoid getting a sizable amount of that energy in my head and my hand.
Dr. Ross Eadie at the University of California, Riverside is widely regarded as one of, if not the most respected scientist in the field, a man who has worked for industry and government for decades studying microwave radiation.
This is the first generation that has put relatively high-powered transmitters against the head, day after day after day.
Choosing his words carefully for this interview with 2020, Dr. Eadie says the body of research, while still far from conclusive, raises the possibility of some very serious harm from extensive exposure to cell phones.
The picture that's emerging is that over the lifetime of the individual, you may see changes that could be considered health effects or potential health risks, including leukemia and brain tumors.
Those are scary words. Brain tumors, leukemia.
I understand, and I think responsibly one has to bring those into the forefront.
We likely have a looming health problem on our hands with radio frequency radiation. It's called RF, and it's emitted from all wireless technologies. This includes both consumer products and infrastructure issues, everything from cell and cordless phones, cell towers, Wi-Fi internet, wireless computer systems in schools and homes, WiMAX, radio frequency ID tags, and a host of other high-tech products. The continuing unfettered use of this kind of radiation needs much closer scrutiny. People assume that these technologies are safe, but at the federal level there is almost no government research today, and most of the regulatory agencies have had their programs completely eviscerated. A whole area of important expertise is being lost just when we need it most. Almost all of the research on RF is now coming from Europe, and it's coming from Asia. We're falling far behind. No one is protected in the U.S. today from long-term, low-level exposures to RF, which is what we mostly experience. It's called electrosmog, and it's a form of energetic air pollution. One study in Europe a few years back found that the background RF in urban areas had increased by a factor of over 3,000% in just a 10-year period. Cell technology likely accounts for the rise that they measured. U.S. cities are thought to be comparable, if not higher. That, by anyone's reckoning, is an altered environment. We're essentially experimenting on people without their consent.
We have a high brain tumor rate on Lookout Mountain, 3 times more than should be occurring, according to normal statistics. And it's happened not once, but twice when they've audited 2 entire different time frames. They got the same elevation, and every person who had a brain tumor, everyone, was in direct line of sight of the towers.
Good evening, bonsoir, and welcome to the virtual press conference of the International Agency for Research on Cancer. My name is Nicolas Gaudin, and I'm the head of communications for IARC here in Lyon. The working group has been meeting to assess the carcinogenic hazards associated with exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic fields and has just finished their evaluations. I'm pleased to have with me here in the IARC studios Dr. Jonathan Samet. Thank you, and I'll hand over to Dr. John Samet.
Thank you, and good evening. I'm going to briefly summarize the work of a group of 31 international scientists carried out over the last 8 days here in Lyon. The working group classified radio frequency electromagnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic to humans. The nature of these fields as they come from various devices, including wireless phones. So I think with that summary, I'll turn things back to you and your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Samet. Next, Jeff Waters from Australian Broadcasting.
There hasn't been any mention so far as I've heard, of telephone towers, mobile telephone towers, and their effects on human health. Should we conclude that mobile telephone towers are also included in the possible risk?
The designation for Group 2B is radio frequency electromagnetic fields. That is unspecified as to source, so the Group 2B classification would have broad applicability to sources with this type of emissions.
This is an Apple iPhone. Let's use our radio frequency meters to measure the microwave radiation coming off of this iPhone. It's averaging about 15,000 microwatts per square meter at a distance of approximately 1 to 2 inches.
Okay, the reason we're told not to hold the cell phone next to our head is because it's constantly emitting microwave radiation, and as you move it away you can see the level goes down. If you live within a few hundred meters of these cell phone antennas, you are exposed to constant microwave radio frequency radiation. And this is 11,000 microwatts per meter squared. This is a long-term care facility. And on the grounds, we have a cell phone antenna disguised as a flagpole. Here we have more than 5,000 microwatts per meter squared.
Dr. Jennifer Armstrong specializes in environmental medicine.
The big thing with kids is they're more vulnerable.
Why?
Children are more vulnerable. Their skulls are thinner. Their bodies are not as strong as ours in general. They're developing, their brains are developing. So you expose children to radiation and their little bodies don't handle it as well.
And cardiologist Dr. Stephen Sinatra agrees.
As a parent, if I had a young child, would I want to use my child as an experiment to see if it's going to take 30 years or 20 years or 10 years they become sick? No, not me.
If anything, I think maybe microwave radiation is going to show up to be much more harmful than smoking, simply because of the amount of exposure that we're seeing in our everyday environment.
So how about the people who make these products?
It's like being cooked. You know, you get it's like laying on the beach for too long. That feeling that, you know, your eyes are all dried out, and your ears ring, and your fillings, if you got metal fillings, you can actually taste the RF when you're up there. It tastes metallic. And the longest I've ever spent on the tower is 16 hours, and I totally fried myself.
This is one woman's experience of living on the top floor under cell antennas for 2 months.
It started with my daughter. She initially got a rash on her leg that was sort of unexplainable. Some more of the symptoms include a sort of hissing in my ear, in particular when I'm in my apartment, but for about 3 days, anywhere I went, it would just sort of come in. I kind of felt like an antenna, and I'd sort of kind of go like, trying to find the place where the hissing or the buzzing stopped. But now, wherever I go, I'm feeling the same as I felt in my apartment, feeling dizzy and nauseous and a sort of a metallic taste in my mouth, headache and pressure on my head, and just feeling like I want to sort of faint or throw up. And that's wherever I go now.
Dr. David Carpenter is a world-renowned expert in environmental toxins in Albany, New York. And he says the Canadian government is just plain wrong.
What we do is look at the weight of the evidence.
But that's what they said they did.
They didn't. The weight of the evidence demonstrates clearly that exposure to radiofrequency radiation causes disease. The evidence is strongest for cancer.
You know, yes, while people need their cell phone service, that's absolutely true. They don't need to go outside someone's window. They don't need to go across a school. They don't need to go in places like that where you're really potentially putting the public at risk.
In my judgment, we are sitting on a ticking bomb, and we're not doing what we should do to advise people on ways that they can reduce their exposure, to tell them that they should reduce their exposure, that they should just be aware of this threat. You know, I sincerely hope it's not as bad as I think it is. But my job as a public health official is to do what I can to prevent disease, not wait till people develop their brain tumor and then find ways of treating it. And I think that the evidence at present calls for an active, urgent message to the public, to the politicians, to the companies, that we must find ways of reducing exposure to radiofrequency fields. We have a massive human experiment of people that have been exposed to something that probably is going to result in an increased risk of these cancers.